So what my research has pointed to is that when you get all 5 of these elements at one time, or, a significant amount of them, depending on what level you're getting the energy and the aggression from all 5 sides, it becomes this perfect storm of women leaving their fields. And it is absolutely unnecessary and preventable suffering. Hey, friend, welcome back to the Art of Managing Your Brain podcast. I'm Dr. Charlie Hornes, and let me tell you, today's episode, it's a big one. Today, we are diving into the 5-part elements of the framework that I developed during my doctoral research. And this framework was born out of years of studying women leaders in male-dominated environments, navigating male-dominated fields, and observing them doing human subject research, dealing with subtle systemic challenges that undermine their confidence and their well-being. But it's also born out of my own personal struggles that I suffered in very difficult environments out in my field, environments where I had to learn so much the hard way. And part of what I'm sharing with you on this podcast is information to help equip you out in your own field, especially if you are a woman leader in male-dominated fields, because these are specific and they have their own challenges. And that's really what I try to focus on this show. So these tools, they're going to help you thrive, succeed, get those raises and those promotions that you have fought tooth and nail for, that you deserve, those titles that you have earned. So today, this overview of the framework that I've created, it's a guide to help you understand what's happening, to separate what's systemic from what's personal, and to help you reclaim your power in environments that feel stacked against you. So if you've ever felt blindsided by microaggressions, passive-aggressive resistance, and unspoken biases in the workplace, then this is your episode. So by the end of today's discussion, my goal is for you to feel equipped to recognize these dynamics, validate your own experiences, and take steps towards reclaiming your confidence and your mental clarity.
I'm Dr. Charlie Hornes, highly anxious people pleaser turned master certified professional life coach. Learning to manage my brain was so life-changing for me that I got certified so that I could teach these incredible evidence-based practices to you. Are you ready for massive change? Let's go.
Before we dive in, just a quick reminder. If you have found value in this podcast, I invite you to subscribe. Also, if you would leave us a review, we would really appreciate that. Give us a rating, add some comments, let us know what you think about the conversation. And if you know somebody that this show might benefit, would you share it with them? Your support is helping us reach more women who are navigating these exact same challenges that you are, and it keeps this conversation growing. Also, if you've ever wondered what might be holding you back mentally and emotionally, what thought pattern is keeping you stuck and stressed, then I invite you to take my free quiz at charliehornescoaching.com/quiz. It's a quick, insightful way to uncover the thought patterns that may be limiting your potential and also learn how to shift them. Okay, so let's begin by outlining the 5 elements that make up this 5-part framework. So this model is designed to help you recognize and navigate the systemic dynamics that women face in male-dominated spaces. So here's the 5 elements, and then we'll get into them. So the first one is called camouflaged misogyny or camouflage sexism. This is the new face of sexism, where biases hide behind task-based conflicts and passive-aggressive tactics. Basically, it's misogyny sideswiping you, T-boning you. You don't see it coming. The second piece is the surprise factor. What this is the hidden dysfunctions within a system that catch you off guard and derail your confidence. The third element is what I talked about before, the gender bias gap. This is a double burden of proving your worth as a woman while starting at a deficit compared to your male colleagues. And you also start with lower money, more work, more domestic free labor in the workplace, all that kind of stuff. So that is sort of a double whammy of this gender bias gap, depending on how wide and how deep it is for you in your particular environment. The fourth piece of this is what I call the threshold transgression. This is a neurological toll of chronic stress and its impact on your mental and physical health. And there's a catch to this, and we're going to get into that because it's a slippery slope and you don't see it coming. And the fifth element of this is what I call the believability factor. This is the struggle of being heard, believed, and supported by your leadership and your peers. So each of these elements represents a layer of challenge that women face in environments shaped by systemic bias. So over the next few minutes, we're going to unpack each element, explore how it shows up in your own environment, and provide some practical tools to help you navigate it. Let's handle the first element, which is this camouflaged misogyny, or what I also call camouflaged sexism. So we have to recognize what this hidden bias is. Overt sexism, it's no longer socially accepted in many spaces, so it's gone underground. People haven't changed how they think. They just have changed how they tell you how they think. So instead of direct comments or actions, like maybe many pioneers out in all of our fields addressed head on, they were told straight up that people didn't want them in that field or that office or holding that type of authority. They can't do that anymore. So you're encountering passive aggressive behavior, and it's task-based conflicts that feel disproportionately charged. And what it's doing, this task-based conflict, it's masking the identity conflict of people that are struggling with women holding significant offices. For example, you might be assigned a project that sets you up to fail, or you notice that your ideas are consistently ignored until someone else suggests them. Maybe you've noticed that you're not getting great instruction, you're not getting great feedback, you're not getting great direction. And it's not that you don't know how to do your job, it's just that we need that type of, as I've said before, we need that feedback. We need to know what those expectations are so that we can hit the mark and know we're being successful, right? Success is sadly a social contract. We need to know from other people that are ahead of us, even a few steps, a leader, a boss, whatever, to let us know that we're hitting the mark. I mean, there's always someone ahead of us that can explain that and give you the feedback you need to know that you're doing the right job. A lot of the time, you're not getting that direction. You're not getting that feedback. And these aren't random occurrences. They're systemic patterns and they're rooted in bias. Here's a way we can help navigate this first element. So when you encounter a situation that feels overly charged, we need to pause and we need to ask ourselves, is this about the task that I'm being given and the energy around the task being disproportionate to the level that it should be? Is it about the actual task at hand, or is there an underlying dynamic at play? Now, let me unpack this a little bit more for you. Task-oriented conflict, masking identity-oriented conflict, is what I call coffee pot problems. We as women leaders, we're good at what we do. We're problem solvers. We're hired for specific jobs because we have the right qualifications, education, experience, et cetera, et cetera. And we're good at what we do. We solve problems. So you come into my office and you are disproportionately angry about a coffee pot not working. And your energy is not proportionate to the task that needs solving. And as somebody who is capable of solving problems, I fix your coffee pot, right? And then instead of being happy or giving me that social contract of approval that the job was done, the problem was solved, you come at me again about staplers. And again, I'm good at what I do. I solve problems. I'm hired to do this stuff. And so I get you a million staples for $1 because I'm also a good shopper. And you're still mad. So it's not about the coffee pot. It's not about the staples. It's about the fact that you were raised steeped in socialization of patriarchy as well as expectations of gender roles. You are bumping up against the identity problem that you are facing. Bit of an identity crisis, right? Women shouldn't be in this role. Women shouldn't have this type of authority, blah, 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 blah. It's different for everybody. Women do not know this is what they're dealing with in this day and age. You see, there are many of us that were raised to believe that sexism died during the civil rights movement, that Gloria Steinem and Jane Fonda put a stiletto heel through its forehead and it's dead. And when we walk into environments that we're hired for, we just assume that we're being hired as equals. But for many people, that's still not the case. Many people still hold on to the resentment of these gender roles they were raised and steeped in their entire lives. And it's impossible to just let it go. So they do know they can't come at you and say that, seemingly. I mean, I don't know about you, but honestly, I would rather know that the problem you have with me is that you don't think I deserve to be in my office. Fine. I respect that. It doesn't mean I'm going to change it or I'm going to leave or you're going to run me out, but I at least respect your perspective. I was still hired though. But if you aren't capable of saying that to me, to us as women, and you come at me about the coffee pot or the stapler and you're never pleased, that creates a problem. So that is what many women are dealing with right now out in their fields, especially these male-dominated fields, because either we're expected to behave like our male colleagues, or we're pushing up against this gender bias gap, or we're dealing with this camouflaged misogyny, and we don't understand the disproportionate, toxic, and aggressive behavior that's coming at us over something that is trivial, seemingly. Now, I need my coffee in the morning. I get it if you're grumpy and the coffee pot's not working, but you don't get to come into my office and scream at me about it, right? Okay, so that's what we're talking about. Disproportionate energy around a task-oriented issue that should not be that big of a deal, should just be solved. And we, as women leaders, typically are fantastic problem solvers. So we solve the problem, right? So when we name this bias, when we can see, and the clue is the disproportionate reaction of aggressiveness, hostility, commentary, passive aggressiveness, just the stuff that makes you feel ick. It's not about you. That is about them not being able to say or have the courage to say to you exactly what it is that they think. When we can, as women, be equipped to name the bias based on the external reactions we're getting and identify it rather than take that on as if we've done something wrong, right? If we could say, oh, here's the issue, here's the disproportionate response to the issue, that's a clue. I'm not dealing with something straightforward here. When we start to name that bias, what we do is we activate the prefrontal cortex, the thinking brain, the frontal brain, and that keeps us from going into the fight or flight, freeze or fawn pattern when people come at us, especially when people come at us from left field, we get, T-boned, sideswiped. The passive aggressive comment we don't expect from a seemingly decent human being that, should be working in a professional environment. And yet it's so easy for women to just get sideswiped, right? Instead, when you train yourself to identify based on how you're feeling, again, this all goes back to how you're feeling and what thought is generating through your brain. Like if your first thought comes up that says, oh, I deserve to be yelled at because the coffee pot doesn't work. No, you don't. But your brain doesn't want you, kicked out of the herd, right? Bear fodder. So your brain is the first thing to make the decision to please the person who's angry with you. So you can't go by your thoughts because the thoughts are what's creating the icky feeling in your body. And that is the clue that you're actually dealing with something disproportionately inappropriate most of the time. So when you begin to identify this bias based on how you feel, and then that kickstarts your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that's responsible for logic and decision making, rather than letting the amygdala, which governs the fight or flight responses, rather than let it take over. Again, what we call amygdala hijacking. You don't need to get amygdala hijacked over a coffee pot or stapler or whatever. So when we can create this shift, it helps us respond thoughtfully rather than reacting emotionally. Because if you don't see it for what it is, that it is an absolute camouflaged misogyny and sexism, you cannot think it through logically. This is the first part of the framework. And what this framework is supposed to identify for you is it's a bit of a perfect storm. If you end up with all 5 of these pieces in one place, sadly, you'll probably last 18 months to, 2 years. What my research has pointed to is that when you get all 5 of these elements at one time, or, a significant amount of them, depending on what level you're getting the energy and the aggression from all 5 sides, it becomes this perfect storm of women leaving their fields. And it is absolutely unnecessary and preventable suffering. This is what's going to help you become thoughtful in the moment and create that aerial view, right? Get in the plane, get up there with me and see the storm system for what it is rather than standing on the shore and getting pummeled because you don't know what's going on. You don't see it. You have no map, hurricane map, no tracker, no TV. You're just rooted on the shore and getting your butt kicked. And you don't have to do that. You can get in the plane and let's get up there and let's see the system for what it is. Something you can do is to start tracking these moments in a journal. Now, for those of you that hate the word journal or journaling, let me just quickly say, you're supposed to. If you love it, great. But journaling actually forces you to slow down. And I speak from experience on this because I actually hate journaling and I have to make myself do it because my brain thinks way faster than I can write. And I get very frustrated. At least I can type pretty fast. But the idea of physically writing with handwriting in, pen or pencil on a sheet of paper or a book frustrates the heck out of me. But the point is that it slows me down and it makes me stop and it makes me think through rather than rush through because my brain is going a mile a minute. So when you stop at the end of your day and you identify 10 minutes for yourself and you track some of these things and you slowly write them down and you're specific and intentional, you start to code them in your mind in different ways than just, thinking rushed thoughts. If you write down the context, write down the feelings, where you're feeling it in your body, and start to see if there's any patterns that you notice. Are there specific people doing this? What are the issues? Are they all these task-oriented problems that really are disproportionate to the response. What is the response? What words are they saying? What is their affect when they come at you? And how do you feel? Where do you feel it in your body? And is this about the task or is this about something bigger? Because if you solve the problem, what happens then? So this practice, it's not only going to validate your experience, because that's one of the biggest things, is to feel like what we're experiencing is real, because it doesn't. The next piece is the surprise factor. With this, we're managing hidden dysfunction. For example, I don't know about in your field, but in my field, we always had sort of a meet and greet part of the interview. You know, you travel there, you see the place, you choose to bring your family or not. There's not a lot of dysfunction when the interviews go well, or you're not being told about the dysfunction. And you don't know until you get there and accept the position that you're actually dealing with a place that has significant dysfunction. There could be generational trauma, things that happened in the past that have been sort of passed down, stories that were forgotten, stories that recently happened that they just don't want you to know about, maybe some, misconduct, things like that have created a bit of a level of dysfunction in the system, in the what we call the family system, even though it's a workplace. But that is sort of a methodology you can look into, family systems. That's Murray Bowen's work, and that's really helpful. And also Edwin Friedman does that as well. Many systems, whether they're workplaces or organizations, they have these deeply ingrained dysfunctions. These dysfunctions often remain hidden during these initial stages of a job or a project, only to surface when you're fully immersed in it and it's a little late. This surprise, it can feel a bit like a betrayal, and you don't see it coming necessarily, or at least you don't see the depth and width of the level of dysfunction that you are going to encounter or you start to encounter. I have had experiences where I followed sexual misconduct and didn't know about it. One of the situations where one of the, leaders was involved in sexual misconduct, moved back and tried to get back involved with the organization. And I had no idea any of that was going to happen, and basically caused a bunch of chaos. And that was very difficult to deal with. When you enter with this sort of level of optimism and trust and excitement about a new position, only to find yourself navigating these unexpected challenges that feel deeply personal, because without knowing, without preparation, without thoughtfulness, and without potentially not deciding to take a position because you had known in advance about the drama, you start taking stuff personal. But here's the key. These dysfunctions, they aren't about you. They aren't. They're not about you. And I know that's so easy to say and impossible to hear, but they're not. These are, again, systemic anxiety and resistance to change. So what can we do about it? You can adopt a mindset of predictive resilience. So assume surprises are going to come when you take a new job, and assume they can be bad. Don't assume everything is perfect. This is fine. You finally got the perfect job and this, that, and the other. We talked about perfectionism. It's not a thing, and it's infinite. You'll be chasing a perfect job forever. So there's no grass greener thing. Assume that there will be things you uncover. If this is a position you're excited about, you need to still have your feet on the ground and understand that you can predict something is going to be uncovered. Maybe it's small, but it could be big. You may not have been told. And remember the joy and the energy and the excitement when that stuff comes up, and you are creating predictive resilience. So assume the surprises are going to come, not because you're failing, but because systems that can be under stress behave irrationally. And the people that are within the system that is under stress also behave irrationally. Back to the coffee pot problems, right? So the mental preparation, it softens the emotional impact of the surprise factor when you are taking preventative measures for your own resilience to expect something always to be there. Could be big, could be small. So something you could do for this one is, just take 5 minutes this week and reflect on any recent challenges that felt disproportionate. Not just coffee pot problems, but what are some things that might be pointing to irrational behavior within the system? And then you have to understand in the situation, is there a part of this resistance that really is about you? Or is it a symptom of something dysfunctional within the system? That's the beginning of this mind shift that I talk about. So you can write down your observations and notice, again, any reoccurring patterns, because it is identifying these systemic patterns within the system and within the key players that are sort of, in your face or causing you trouble. That's that 80-20 rule, right? Anywhere you go, 80% of everything is chill and cool. And then there's like 20, even 10% of the people that are like key players that make things difficult, or can be very healthy and make things smooth and awesome. So what are these reoccurring patterns? Who are the people? Who are the key players? What are the behaviors? What are the feelings you're having? And start identifying what they are. And remember, even if you've made a mistake, it doesn't warrant this disproportionate level of irrational behavior and high levels of energy and passive aggressiveness or aggressiveness in your face or hostility. It doesn't warrant it. There's nothing you've done wrong that has earned that type of response. Okay, so this next piece we talked about a bit is this gender bias gap. We have to bridge this double deficit, the third element of this framework. So you're walking in potentially being surprised by dysfunction you didn't know about, and then T-boned by coffee pot problems. And on top of that, you have the gender bias gap, which is basically other people's opinions about your gender and their expectations of your gender roles that they have been raised to believe, that they have been immersed in, that social expectations have trained them to believe are true. And again, they're thoughts and they're based in nothing. But those are the people that are going to impose their belief systems on top of you without understanding that it's not a thing. And then you have the trust piece where women are not granted trust walking in and men are. Men lose trust. Women earn trust. And then there's that whole other piece about, pay gap and, not getting the raises and the promotions and doing all this extra work at the office that, is basically unpaid labor. So it's not what you're educated in and the job you were brought in to do. So men often start, they're assumed competent. They're assumed trustworthy. While women face that double deficit, we're not only proving ourselves, but we're also battling against these stereotypes, these socialized gender roles that people, made up from somewhere. One of the things you can do about this piece is to reframe it. The gap isn't a reflection of you. It's not a reflection of your competence. It's a reflection of systemic bias. That's what this is. The gap is a reflection of the level of systemic bias within the system you're walking into. So if the systemic bias is high, you're going to have that wide and deep abyss of a gender gap that's hard to bridge. If the systemic bias is not so high, it's a little bit more on a normal side. There's always going to be that because we're humans and we stereotype and we have ideas, blah, 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 but you can identify if there's systemic bias that is disproportionate to reality in today's day and age, what is acceptable and appropriate, or what is just absolutely irrational. So if you understand this piece, you can ask these types of questions. While you're also gauging the dysfunction of the system, you can also gauge the level of the gender bias gap. What are you walking into as a woman in leadership? Okay, now this is why this is important though for you. Because constantly having to prove yourself activates your body's auto stress response. And what this does is lead to these elevated levels of cortisol, our neuromodulators, our neurotransmitters. And cortisol is one of them. And like I've said before, high levels of some of these neuromodulators actually change your brain. They cause brain damage. One of the studies I read says that the dendrites in your brain matter actually shrink when there's too much of these things in your system. We're not supposed to live this way. We're not supposed to live in both chronic and acute stress and anxiety. You have to understand that you cannot live in a high level of constant, chronic, high activated stress. You can't. It's not good for you. And over time, this chronic stress, this chronic and acute stress, right, can lead to what we identify as burnout, anxiety, and even what we might think of as symptoms of PTSD. Definitely the PTSI, which is the post-traumatic stress injury. We may not have the disorder. We have now faced an injury that is based in a level of trauma because we don't understand what's happening. So that's what this 5 framework is about, is explaining to you what is happening and what's happening in your brain, what's happening around you, and then what you can do about it. I've got a place now where I can put everybody's resources in one storefront. What's really cool is when you use the what we call affiliate links, and I'm now becoming an affiliate for a whole bunch of different things. It's all on my website at charliehornesscoaching.com, and it's on the bonus resources page. What happens is when you purchase something off of that, a portion of it goes back to the show. And so what you're doing basically when you buy from there is you're supporting the show at no additional cost to you, which is kind of like the coolest thing ever. It's going to help us continue to create content for you and bring on incredible guests that are, they blow my mind. So I'm hoping they will blow your mind too, whether it's metaphysics and psychology and theology or high fantasy romance. You're going to find your next favorite read right there. Let's go. So when we go back to thought work, one of the exercises you can do for this one is, again, write down some of your small wins. A moment where you demonstrated your competence or your resilience, even if you weren't acknowledged for it externally. This is about you identifying that you know you're good at what you do. You're educated, you're talented, you're experienced, you were hireable, clearly, and you made some wins. And you don't need it to be validated externally, because these wins that you identified just for yourself in that journal where you're identifying your patterns and all the other stuff, the wins, they build a mental reservoir of confidence that can counteract the effects of this bias. It is a way to support yourself in moments of crisis when you can't think of anything that you've done well and you're being convinced that everything's your fault, when the truth is you're dealing with systemic bias. That's what you're dealing with. And disproportionate levels of aggression and hostility and a bunch of camouflage stuff. So you need the reservoir of wins because you will rely on that. This next piece, the 4th piece, is what I've called the threshold transgression. So this is about knowing your limits. However, you don't know your limit until you've reached it. You see the problem with that? All right, let's get into that. The threshold transgression. What we're referring to here is what I identify as a tipping point where chronic acute stress leads to what we believe to be initially significant mental and physical health challenges. Now, those are byproducts of living in a long period of acute chronic stress because the outside does not match the inside. Our reality in our brains does not match what we are up against externally. And you can slowly fall into cognitive dissonance. You can slowly be sort of, in the actual terminology of gaslit. Now, that's a word that's used everywhere all the time. You have to know what that is, right? It's from a movie in the 30s. And it's about convincing somebody that what they believe to be true and real, what they're experiencing, what they know as fact is not true. To the point where you can convince them that what they think is true, they start to question and they start to defer to you being right. And if you watch the movie, this is what this husband is doing to this wife, to the point where there's like lights flickering and then he's telling her it's not happening, but he's the one doing it. I mean, it's like, watch the movie. It's great. It really explains what this phenomenon is. It's not something to be thrown around lightly. Okay. You're not getting gaslit everywhere you go. This is an intentional thing that will push you over the edge into cognitive dissonance. Because your reality, what you know to be true, that you are competent, hireable, great at what you do, but you're getting screamed at disproportionately because of systemic bias that you don't deserve, even if you screwed up. Like, I'm telling you, even if you screw something up, it does not warrant a disproportionate level of hostility. That's inappropriate in a professional environment. People don't get to yell at you in a professional environment because if you're allowing yourself to own the coffee pot problems, if you're allowing yourself to work too hard to earn the trust your male colleagues already have. Again, I'm talking generally. This isn't every environment. This isn't every male. This isn't every boss. But systemically, a lot of women are still struggling with these particular things based in my research. We don't need you to figure out what your threshold is of tolerance, of the level of disproportionate stress and anxiety that you can handle until you pop. Because you don't know what that threshold is until you hit it. And then it's too late. You've gone over. You tipped over into full-blown cognitive dissonance because you don't understand what's going on. You don't understand the level of disproportionate reactions you're getting from things that don't make sense, right? From things that seem significantly irrational. Because when you get into this state, your brain's survival system goes into overdrive. You might struggle with emotional regulation. You start to have memory lapses. And this is interesting, and it'll get into the last piece because, if I've had a lot of colleagues in my field that would go and complain about particular inappropriate behavior, and they would be asked to describe situations. And because of the high level of acute chronic stress they were dealing with for a long amount of time, they were starting to have mental health problems as far as they couldn't remember things. Because that's part of what happens when you're in high levels of neuromodulators rushing through your brain when they shouldn't be. One of the symptoms is memory lapse. If these things are coming on out of nowhere, seemingly, you've never had a history, you've never had these experiences, and now all of a sudden you can no longer regulate your emotions, you're having problems remembering key points to issues that have, situations that have happened that, you're being asked to dictate back, and you're like, I don't know, because you went into fight or flight, you weren't coding the moment, and then you had all these neurotransmitters running through your brain that causes memory lapse. And some of that stuff can become permanent if you're in a dysfunctional situation for too long. And burnout is the final piece. Burnout isn't a sign of weakness. It's your brain signaling to you that the system you are in is no longer sustainable. Burnout is the final straw. So here's a practical tool. You can create what we call a stress audit. You write down your top 3 sources of stress and then brainstorm one small action that you can take for each of these things to reduce its impact. So this exercise is going to help you regain your sense of control and prioritize your well-being. When you do this, it gives you some things to think about, to consider, things that if you, after writing it down and working it through cognitively, these things will begin to kind of pop up, and it will help you to learn to pause. If you can train yourself to have a pause, to have that sort of elevator speech in your back pocket that you've practiced with your partner, your kids, and, be ready to say, let me get back to you on that, or, wow, that seems to really be bothering you. You want to talk about it? You have to have some stuff intentionally ready to go, because it takes practice. And then this will help you prioritize your well-being as far as not owning this stuff, not being confused as to, is it them or is it me? Newsflash, it's not you. It's not. Even if it is, it's not. You got me? We don't do that in professional environments. So it's not you if this stuff isn't appropriate. All right. Okay, and then this last piece is what I call the believability factor. This is the final element, and even when you raise legitimate concerns, like I was saying before, but you're, showing these potential mirrored symptomatology of mental health problems, you raise concerns, you're feeling emotionally dysregulated, you are feeling a bit of that cognitive dissonance, that reality is not matching the insides and the outsides. Women often will face skepticism. They will be dismissed, or they will outright be disbelieved. Part of this is because of the symptomology that we are exhibiting. I remember when I was in my highest level of stress, not knowing what was going on before I'd identified these pieces of this framework, because I was living in all 5 of them. Well, the first 4. And I went in to get help from my leadership. And I was constantly asked questions like, the whole, what did you do to deserve it? What did you do to create them reacting that way to you? Most women aren't equipped for this stuff. Most fields do not teach women what's happening out there. That these 5 things, if you hit these 5 things, you are in a perfect storm of batshit craziness. And you will spin out and show signs of mirrored mental health symptomology that you probably don't have, for the most part. And here's the truth. What you're experiencing is entirely valid. What you're feeling is entirely valid. The fact that the outside doesn't match the inside, entirely valid, because it doesn't. Whether other people recognize any of this or not, your experience is entirely valid. So give this a little bit of a thought. Your worth isn't defined by other people's ability to see it. You need allies who can validate your experience and help provide guidance. You do not need to seek out women that have the attitude that they had it bad, so should you. If I have experience and information that I can share with you based on what I have learned If I have the bingo card to give you so that you can belly laugh through this stuff rather than leave with, PTSD and cognitive dissonance after 18 months, if I can say to you, here's the stuff that's going to happen potentially in the worst case scenario, here's your bingo card. Call me when you hit bingo. And you call me and say, yeah, you weren't kidding. All the stupid stuff that I didn't actually believe, it happened. That's crazy. Yeah, it's bananas because it's often going to happen. And you don't have to sit there and feel like it's yours. And you don't have to own it. And you don't have to take it home with you. You can yell bingo and laugh because it's kind of funny. It really is when people don't see what they're doing. And they're systemically doing it, like across the board. But you need to know that you're not alone in the journey. Whatever those allies are that you need, whatever those resources are that you need, and I have lots of suggestions. So if you need help, let me know. So that's the 5 elements of this framework. If you feel like you're living in most or all of these, you need to take a breath and you need to understand that you're in a perfect storm. And I need you to get into plane. I need you to get up to the aerial view with me as fast as possible. This is one of those ridiculous formulas that women shouldn't have to play around with. All right, friends, if today's episode resonates with you, then please share this with somebody who you think might need to hear it. And please don't forget to subscribe to The Art of Managing Your Brain for more strategies to navigate life and leadership with clarity and confidence. And if you're not yet on my email list, I invite you to join that because that's really how I'm communicating with our community and sending out, extra bonuses and information. And that's just a really great thing. So if you go to the website, charliehornetscoaching.com, and you can opt into that email list. I would love to have you join us on the email list. And also don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and give us a review if you like the show. And also, if you haven't headed over to charliehornetscoaching.com/quiz to uncover that thought pattern that may be holding you back and sabotaging your success, you can learn how to shift that mindset by identifying it. Thanks again. And remember that you are not defined by the systems that you are navigating. You're defined by your own courage, resilience, and willingness to grow. Take care, and I'll see you next week.